Hi there, I'm Shuppzy. This is episode 1 of Warcraft Space and Story, the pilot episode in fact. So this is a series in which we'll be going through old dungeons, raids, or just other interesting places in the World of Warcraft, and talking about the lore and stories of that place, and any major events that happen there, with a focus on the active stories, meaning the ones we as players get to observe and impact on. So to go with that, we're also going to be talking about how the game lets us be part of these stories, with some discussion about world and level design as we go through. So our first interesting place is Maraudon, which is a high level 30s, mid level 40s dungeon you can find in the Desolate region on Kalimdor. So Maraudon is a very, very old dungeon. In fact, it was the first to be added post-launch of World of Warcraft. And despite that impressive pedigree, if you ask most people their favourite place in the game, this isn't one that comes up basically ever. If you press a little bit further and ask why, people will tell you it's dark and damp and gross and icky and other words like that. And yes, it's those things because it's made to be. It's made very, very well to be, in fact. But more than that, it's got so many different layers of stories and they play off each other and weave into each other really, really interestingly. But more than talk about them from the outside, let's go in and take a look. Okay, so we're just going to stop here to talk for a moment. So what we're going to try and do a lot of in this series is put ourselves into the shoes of a player seeing and experiencing this for the first time. Because I think that's a really, really good way of understanding how a space can contribute to a story. So in this case, to put ourselves into those shoes, we most likely would have been a Horde player, just sort of given the geography of the place, and we would have had a lot of reason to dislike the Centaur coming into Maraudon. So, in some ways, the first active story we encounter within this dungeon is the player's own, and of course you've got a player's own story within every dungeon. And in this case, I almost want to call it a story of revenge. Especially as a Tauren player, you would have known the Centaur to be savages and barbarians and kidnappers and murderers. And you would have come into Maraudon, to their home essentially, to try and give them some of their own medicine in a way. But as you go further and further through Maraudon, especially by the time you get to this spot within the pre-dungeon, you'll see two very different and contrasting themes. So, as I said, everything about Centaur is savage, but you've got this very advanced stonework and obviously some form of script on the walls. Now, this could be two things. One of them is something to do with the Titans. So at some point Maraudon was a Titan vault named Terramok. And the second, and in my opinion the more likely, is it's something built by the ancient Night Elves, specifically the Quel'Dorei, who are the magic-using upper class. Now, I say that because of the writing, which matches a lot of their writing you see in other places in the game, and its proximity to a place called Eldrith the Last to the south, which a lot of us would know as Dire Maw. So, it's quite cool, and it's, we haven't even gone very far in the pre-dungeon, and we're already seeing two stories butting heads with each other, so let's keep moving. So I've always found this spot quite cool. I know we didn't make it very far, but whatever this building was to the ancient Night Elves, it's now a Centaur shrine / spear rack. So I was talking about how the stories were butting heads earlier, now all of a sudden they're weaving into each other. We'll see a lot more of this throughout Maraudon as we go further. And now we come to one of the most defining aspects of Maraudon, and that's its sort of branching path entrances. So it's always been thought of as one bigger dungeon, but with a number of distinct sections. And those are, through the left, the Wicked Grotto. Most people would know that unimaginatively as the purple crystal side. Through the right would take us to the Foulspore caverns, and down the middle would take us to the earthsong falls. Now, I like this because in a lot of ways it sort of messes with player expectations. For most players, they're going to want to go the most direct path to the objectives, so in this case, straight down the middle. But if you had done that, again, putting ourselves in the shoes of the player at the time, you would have hit a dead end and be forced to come back here and engage in one of these stories. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to go through the left into the Wicked Grotto. I promise we'll make it to the actual dungeon soon, I swear guys, see, it's right there. But the Shadow Shard Smasher here is quite cool, as he disappears from the camera angle. So, this is revealing of yet another part of Maraudon. So, I mentioned Maraudon being a vault/prison, and who it's specifically made to hold is Princess Radris, who is the daughter of the Earth Elemental Lord Pharazane the Stone Mother. So, for whatever reason, she was kept separate from the Earth Elemental Plane of Deepholm and was held here. Now, as we'll see further through, she made that not so much of a bad deal on her end. Okay, and once we enter the Wicked Grotto proper, we get yet another layer of the denizens of Maraudon. So in this case, we've got the demons. So I mentioned the Highborn earlier. Now, in Warcraft, wherever the Highborn are involved, there's usually demonic magic. We seem to have picked up some friends. Hopefully that sorted them out. So, yes, they're usually related to demonic magic, and both the Satyr and Imps are a form of demon. The Satyr are probably more interesting because they are actually Night Elves themselves who are corrupted. So, in some ways you can almost assume that they may have lived or worked here, or at least known of this place, however many thousands of years ago, and they've come back into this space and established their own little coven here. And the demonic magic they've been using to summon these imps has caused all sorts of corruption to spread throughout Maraudon. We can see that with the Deep Rot Stomper over there, and we'll see it a lot more as we go through the other parts of Maraudon. Yeah, now I know we made it all of 10 steps, but this is quite cool in a sort of usage of space way. So without this little waterfall here, this would have otherwise been a weird bump in the wall, or more likely it just would have been closed off and not anything. But with this, it creates an interesting little hint of what's to come further in Maraudon. Now, if this is literally your first time seeing any of this dungeon, let me just say having a pure, clean, uncorrupted, even pond of water, nothing growing out of it, no giant terrors attempting to murder us, is very, very surprising within this section of Maraudon. Hopefully it'll make a lot more sense as we go through the Foulspore caverns. But for now, just keep this in mind. Right, and now we encounter the first boss in Tinkerer Gizlock. Now, we were talking about the sort of player story earlier, and this is quite a nice little nod to that. So Gizlock's backstory is that he was one of a group of 6 adventurers who came to Maraudon looking for gems and treasure and basically bosses and loot, right? But the corruption of the place caused all his friends to die and left him absolutely insane. So this is really cool because it's almost challenging the player, and it's saying, others have tried before you, hero, will you be the one to succeed? I think that's really cool for motivating players and getting them to move forward. But we'll leave him alone for now. So we've got an obvious path forward, and then through the right, something we haven't seen before shows up. So we've seen obviously glowing fire braziers, but not in that colour, and the building they're highlighting is something unlike we've ever seen before. And as you can hear, the music's ramping up big time. So it's all about sort of that combined experience. Now, that's quite cool because basically you're going forward and then all of a sudden something catches your eye, and it's almost this, ooh, what's that moment? And it drives you forward. Okay, and once we adventure our way up here, or if you're like me, just sort of walk up here, you encounter Lord Vileton, who's the leader of the Satyr in the area. So this guy after being cursed and after turning into a satyr, came into this space and basically started setting up shop, calling other satyr and summoning demons. And for whatever reason, Princess Theriadris gave him leave to do basically as he pleases, and he very much has. We'll see the results of his work in the Foulspore caverns, which we'll jump over to right now. Okay, now once we enter the Foulspore caverns, we find ourselves in a big empty cavern. Who could have thunk? But we do have a couple interesting things here. So we've got the barbed lasher over there, and obviously giant corrupted flower. Evil flowers are a great enemy in video games because it just goes so hard against what their normal connotations are. And in a lot of ways, this is cool as a soft opening because everything about the Foulspore caverns escalates very, very quickly from here. So let's go see. So in just the short distance we covered, you can see the big change in atmosphere already. So everything's overgrown and foul looking. It's nature in a way, but it just doesn't look right. Now I'm going to try and back up a little bit here from our dryad friends. Now, what's really interesting is this thing. And no, I'm not just pointing out weird random crap to fill space. This is really cool, because given Maraudon's construction as a cave, which necessitates a lot of winding paths into open areas, into more winding paths, it's really nice to have a guiding light of sorts, and that's what this is going to be throughout basically the entirety of the Foulspore caverns. And if you don't believe me, let's pretty much just follow them and see where they take us. And where they lead us is this room. And I remember this room the very first time I came in here. And I don't think fondly is the word for it, but it certainly does create a feeling, right? When you're making a game, or in any game, you've only ever really got people's sight and their sound to work with. And a lot of the times people play muted or have other music running. So being able to create almost a sensory experience with sight is quite difficult. And I feel like this works, right? There's this thing which has absolutely no explanation whatsoever, that every so often belches a maggot out at us. There's more little lava running around the floor. It's just gross in a lot of ways, and it's only going to get worse from here. Alright, now I was talking about things getting worse. This room. The roof is beating. There are what I imagine very on-purposely heart-looking things that belch noxious gas in the air, as we just saw. There's this weird red/orange haze over everything. It's so gross and so cool at the same time. Now, again, if we just keep on the path of our lights, we see what most people would probably come in here for. A boss in the form of Noxion. So, please ignore the bodies. So, Noxion is obviously a water elemental, which brings the story back to that whole Theriadris and the primal elements thing. And he's effectively an embodiment of the corruption within this space. In fact, he's standing behind this thing, which looks like the most unhygienic shower in existence. So, there's not too much to him, but what's rather interesting is that he and another boss we'll see in a little bit, Razorlash, have basically become the pets of Theriadris. And you can guess she's in a very, very weird headspace if living corruption becomes a pet of hers, right? You don't exactly want to love and hug and snuggle this guy. But let's keep moving. Alright, now we were talking about the blind corner that led to Lord Viletongue earlier. This is another cool way of using space to almost reveal a boss to the player. So, Unfortunately, my draw distance is kind of cheating. Most players probably wouldn't have had a draw distance this far back in 2004, but we do see Razorlash down there, who's bigger, who's differently coloured, and is obviously named. So Razorlash effectively goes hand in hand with Noxion, who we saw earlier. He's the flora aspect. Not that Noxion was exactly fauna, but you get what I mean. Now, as we continue on from the Foulspore Caverns, we'll enter the next region called the Poison Falls. See? Poison? Falls? I feel bad about that joke. Okay, so what's quite interesting here is how the space has changed on us very suddenly. So the roof's gotten a lot higher, there's trees, there's all sorts of things that we haven't seen in a while. And probably the most powerful of them, sunlight. Now, think of how often sunlight is used as visual language in movies. You hear people talk about it in books and songs and all sorts of things. There's almost a natural human instinct when you see sunlight after not having it for a while to go and bask in it. Now in this case, if we were to do that, we'd have a shower of gunk poured on us. So it creates this conflicting feeling in the player of, I want to be there, but which is really cool. And at the end of the Poison Falls we encounter Celebras the Cursed, who's a keeper of the grove and one of what's now being called the Wild Gods of Azeroth. So as a keeper of the grove, it's his duty to protect and nurture and save and all those good things life. So the fact that the corruption of Maraudon has gotten to him as well, being such a powerful primal force, again emboldens the player, but more than that, he has a lot to do with the second story of Maraudon. We've seen hints of it thus far, but it becomes the main driving aspect from this point on in the dungeon, and that's the story of Thoradris and Zeta. So Zeta was an elder keeper of the grove, one of the direct sons of Cenarius, who's a demigod basically in his own right, and he came to Maraudon, and between him and Thoradris, the Centaur were created, who then spilled out across the land and did all the evil things they were destined to do. Let's just take a look at these three trees. Now, they're just trees. There's nothing else too special about them, but they tell their own story in a way. So we start off here on the right, more into the Poison Falls. Literally has got, horrible green water spilling over it. It's all dying and decrepit. The next one's a little bit better. It's wilting, but there's some green leaves, but still not looking great. And then the third tree over there, tall, strong, powerful, in the sunlight. And that's what leads us into the Earthsong Falls proper. And here we arrive at the Earthsong Falls themselves. That music kicks in, and there's not really much to do in this space. The turtles before they're neutral. Speaking of, when's the last time we saw something neutral in Maraudon thus far? But it's its own visual reward, right? Like, after all the gunk and mire we've been through, you arrive at this place, you're under the sun, and despite how old the WoW engine is, this is still just a pretty sight. But unfortunately, the journey must continue. And here we encounter one of the first defining creatures of the Earthsong Falls. So the turtles helped, and the earth borers we had already seen, but the Thessala Hydra here communicates something new about this space. So despite how serene and beautiful and everything it appears to be, it's still not without its own dangers, and its dangers in this form are what's basically a three-headed dinosaur, right? And there's going to be some actual dinosaurs a little bit further. So it says something very primordial and dangerous about this space, and gives it a really nice prehistoric feel. But as always, we've got to keep moving. Now, the shape of the dungeon has changed again. Everything's a lot more open, there's a lot more paths. And where there's more paths, there's more confusion for the players, especially remembering how objective-focused most people are. So, it's not as hand-holdy as the little amber lights before, but these flowers are what's going to mark our progress through the rest of the story of the Earthsong Falls. They're kind of interesting in their own right, they seem to be recycling. So, good energy-saving technique, spewing your own water back onto you. Alright, and we arrive at this fork in the road and we see a few new interesting things. Primarily the primordial behemoth. Primordial being a word I've used a few times now, so I feel vindicated. Thanks, game. And so this is an earth giant, and at first glance seems related to the earth elementals, right? Big, rocky dude. But the earth giants were actually allies of the titans. They helped them shape the land, and in this case they probably would have acted as the Radras's jailers / wardens. Now, over time, she slowly coerced them to her side. The other interesting thing we see are the white crystals. So we've seen purple and orange thus far, obviously, but white is a new colour, and this is the first time we encounter it. And if we follow them, you can see they make a path leading us up there. Where they lead us specifically to is a guy named Landslide. So if these are the jailers, you can think of him as the warden. And over time, same as all the other Earth Giants, he ended up more like the Radras's bodyguard. Now, we're not going to go up to Landslide because his path is actually a dead end. And every time we've mentioned sort of guiding lights before, it's always been the path of progress. But it doesn't always have to be. Sorry, just moving away to avoid the screen shaking there. It doesn't always have to be. As long as it leads you to an experience of a different kind, something you haven't encountered before, you're still rewarded for following the path, and that's all just fine. But the actual path of progress is here through our flower friends once more. Alright, now just like with the Wicked Grotto before, we had a path, we get to enjoy the Earthsong Falls one more time, and then to the right, something else catches our eye. So this huge beam of sunlight. And again, my draw distance is ruining it for us, but as you get further and further, again, being the player of the time, you would have gotten to about here and started making out the shape of antlers and some sort of mound. Now, what that actually is the grave of Satyr. So when the Centaur were born, they grouped up into one of the first hordes, and they basically rose up and killed Zeta for siring them, effectively. And that drove the Radras mad. And in her grief, she allowed Wildtongue to do whatever the hell he wanted, and let more than half her home go to hell. The only part that's been preserved is this area of the Earthsong Falls, because of Zeta's influence as a keeper of the grove. Now, I've been trying to mostly avoid killing creatures, except the ones that deserved it, but we're going to do this here. And by doing that, we've closed the stories of Maraudon. So the first is obviously the player's story, right? We came here seeking vengeance of the sort, and we discovered there's a lot more to this place than we at first thought. We found a dark coven of evil magic, and we uprooted that. We found horrible corruption within the nature of the area, and we drove all that back. And then we entered this place that should be beautiful and should be serene and all these things, and discovered there's something very, very wrong, primally wrong, about this place as well, so we were forced to deal with that. And the second story we closed is Zeta and the Radras's, right? And it's almost a love story. Not in boy loves girl, girl loves boy, they live happily forever after, but more in the Greek and Roman and even older mythological tradition, where two forces of nature, two godlike beings that should not be, come together and create something horrible. And they spill out into the world and do all sorts of horrible and destructive things, and it's up to the hero to save them. And I almost feel like there's one more story, right? One more that's told purely through the space around us. There's no hints to it or anything. And that's the story of evolution. In the Foulspore caverns, it's very clear, right? So it's flowers and slimes and very simple and very evil creatures in a way. Even the Wicked Grotto has its own hints. The imps are a very simple and very early form of demon. The satyr are an evolved form of night elves in their own way. And as you progress through, you enter the earthsong Falls, where things are a bit more complex. Still dangerous, but far more complex. Right? You wouldn't have seen a hydra walking around the Foulspore caverns and been like, yep, that fits. And of course we had the actual dinosaurs in the Dimetrodon. Even the plant life around, right? Ferns are a very ancient form of plant. And then by the time you get to this space, this could be most anywhere in Azeroth current. It's almost a journey through time to reach here. Now, I'll accept that may just be me reading into things way too much, but I don't know, you find these sorts of things when you go looking for them. Anyhow, I've been Shuppzy. That's been the story of the space, and that's how the space has told the story. Thank you for your time.